Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell had seen many things in her 20-year career with the Metropolitan Police, but nothing quite prepared her for the call that came through at 6:47 a.m. on a gray Tuesday morning in October. The voice on the other end was crisp, authoritative, and carried the unmistakable weight of royal protocol. "Inspector Mitchell? This is Commander Harrison from Royalty Protection. We need you at Kensington Palace immediately. There's been an incident involving Prince George." Sarah's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. The steam curled upward as silence stretched across the line. In her line of work, an incident involving a member of the royal family could mean anything from a security breach to something far more serious. "What kind of incident, sir?" "The kind that requires your particular expertise." "How soon can you be here?" 20 minutes later, Sarah's unmarked police car pulled through the gates of Kensington Palace. The morning mist clung to the manicured lawns, and the ancient bricks of the palace seemed to absorb what little sunlight managed to pierce the overcast sky. She had been to the palace before, but never under circumstances like these. Royal Protection Officer James Crawford met her at the entrance. His usually pristine uniform showed signs of stress, a slightly loosened tie, hair that looked like fingers had run through it more than once. Crawford was known throughout the service as unflappable, the kind of man who could maintain perfect composure while facing down armed intruders. Seeing him rattled sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "Thank God you're here," Crawford said, falling into step beside her as they walked through the corridor. "We've managed to keep this quiet so far, but we need answers fast." The corridor stretched ahead of them, lined with portraits of long-dead royals whose painted eyes seemed to follow their urgent progress. Sarah's footsteps echoed despite her attempts to walk quietly. Everything about the palace demanded reverence, from the high ceilings to the priceless artwork, but today the grandeur felt oppressive rather than magnificent. "Where's Prince George now?" Sarah asked. "Safe. He's with his parents in their private quarters. The doctor has examined him and says he's physically unharmed, but..." Crawford paused, struggling with the words. "Inspector, what we found doesn't make sense. Nothing about this situation makes sense." They stopped outside a door that Sarah recognized as leading to the children's wing of the palace. Crawford's hand hovered over the door handle, and she could see the internal struggle playing out across his features. "Before we go in," he said, "you need to understand something. Prince George is 9 years old. He's a bright kid, curious about everything, but he's also been through something that no child should experience. When we found him this morning, he was..." Crawford swallowed hard. He was terrified. The door opened to reveal what had once been Prince George's bedroom. Now it looked like a crime scene. The bed sheets were twisted and pulled off the mattress. A lamp lay broken on the floor, its shade crumpled beyond repair. Books were scattered everywhere, their pages torn and bent. But it was the window that drew Sarah's attention immediately. The window was open, its curtains billowing gently in the morning breeze. More importantly, the window screen had been removed and was lying on the floor in pieces, as if something had forced its way through from the outside. "The security cameras?" Sarah asked. "That's the first mystery," Crawford replied. "Every camera covering this section of the palace went dark between 2:15 and 2:47 a.m. All of them, simultaneously. Our tech team says it wasn't a malfunction, someone knew exactly what they were doing." Sarah walked over to the window and looked out. The drop to the ground was significant, at least 20 feet to the courtyard below. Anyone attempting to climb up would need professional equipment and considerable skill. More puzzling was how they could have done it without triggering the palace's extensive security systems. Motion detectors? Also disabled during the same time window. Whoever did this had inside knowledge of our security protocols. Sarah crouched down near the bed, pulling on latex gloves. The carpet showed signs of a struggle, furniture moved, fabric fibers that didn't belong to the room's original contents. But it was what Crawford showed her next that made her blood run cold. On the pristine white pillowcase, clearly visible against the Egyptian cotton, were small drops of blood. Not much, but enough to tell a story. Sarah carefully lifted the pillow and found more evidence underneath, two distinct bite marks pressed into the fabric, as if something with sharp teeth had grabbed the pillow during a struggle. "My God," Sarah whispered. "What kind of animal makes marks like these?" "That's just it," Crawford said. "We've had experts look at photographs. They can't identify the species. The bite pattern doesn't match anything in their databases, not dogs, not cats, not any wild animal that could conceivably get into central London, let alone onto palace grounds." Sarah stood up, her mind racing through possibilities. In her experience, when evidence didn't make sense, it usually meant she was missing crucial information. She walked around the room again, this time paying attention to details that might seem insignificant to others. Near the dresser, she found scratches in the wooden floor that looked fresh. They were deep, gouged into the hardwood as if made by claws, but the pattern was wrong for any animal she knew. The scratches were too organized, almost deliberate in their placement. "Tell me about last night," Sarah said. "Who was on duty? What was the routine?" Crawford consulted his notes. Prince George went to bed at his usual time, 8:30 p.m. His parents checked on him at 9:15. Everything was normal. The night shift took over at 10 p.m. Officer Reynolds was assigned to this corridor, and he swears he walked past this door every 15 minutes until 2 a.m. And after 2 a.m.? That's when Reynolds reported feeling ill. He asked to be relieved and went to the medical station. Officer Thompson took over, but by then. Crawford gestured helplessly at the room. Something about Crawford's account bothered Sarah, but she couldn't put her finger on what. She made a mental note to interview both officers personally. What time was Prince George found, and by whom? 5:45 a.m. His nanny, Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell, found him. She's been with the family for 6 years, impeccable record, completely trustworthy. When she opened the door to wake him for his morning routine, she found the room like this and Prince George hiding in the wardrobe. Sarah walked over to the large wooden wardrobe and opened it. Inside, she could see where a small body had pressed against the back wall. There were more scratches here, but these looked different, defensive rather than aggressive, as if made by someone trying to claw their way deeper into hiding. He was conscious when she found him? Yes, but barely responsive. He kept saying the same thing over and over. The shadow man came through the window. The shadow man bit me. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Children's testimony was notoriously unreliable, especially after traumatic events, but there was something about those words that felt significant. Where exactly was he bitten? Crawford's face grew even more grave. His neck. 2 small puncture wounds, very precise, almost surgical. The palace doctor said they weren't life-threatening, but they were definitely made by teeth. Human teeth, he thinks, but he can't be certain. Sarah felt her professional detachment wavering. A child attacked in one of the most secure buildings in the country, evidence that defied explanation, and bite marks on his neck that might have been made by a human. Every instinct she had developed over 2 decades of police work was screaming that this case was unlike anything she had ever encountered. "I need to speak with Prince George," she said. "His parents are reluctant. They want to protect him from further trauma. I understand their concern, but if we're going to catch whoever did this, I need to hear his account directly. Children often remember details that adults miss, especially visual details." Crawford nodded reluctantly. "I'll arrange it, but it will have to be handled very carefully. The Prince and Princess of Wales are understandably protective right now." As they prepared to leave the room, Sarah took one last look around. Something was still bothering her about the scene, something that didn't fit with a standard break-in or even a kidnapping attempt. The room showed signs of a struggle, but it was almost too clean, too organized. Most burglars left chaos in their wake, but this felt different. It felt planned. "Crawford," she said, "I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anything about this case that I'm not being told? Any political implications, any threats that have been made against the royal family recently?" Crawford was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see him weighing his words carefully. "There have been some unusual incidents over the past few weeks," he finally said. Nothing that seemed connected at the time, but now I'm wondering if we missed something.
What kind of incidents?
Reports of someone being seen on the palace grounds at night. Always the same description, a tall figure dressed in dark clothes, moving in ways that our guards described as unnatural. We increased patrols, but we never found evidence of an intruder.
Why wasn't this reported to the police?
Because every time we investigated, we found nothing.
No footprints, no DNA evidence, no signs of forced entry anywhere. Our people started thinking it was their imagination, stress from the job. We even had a few officers request transfers because they said the sightings were making them too nervous to work effectively.
Sarah felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in her mind, though the picture they created made no sense yet. "I'll need to interview everyone who reported these sightings," she said.
"Of course. Inspector, there's one more thing you should know before you meet with Prince George. The bite marks on his neck? They're healing remarkably fast. The doctor said that by tomorrow, they might be completely gone. He's never seen anything like it."
As they walked back through the corridor, Sarah found herself looking at the painted portraits with new eyes. The palace had stood for centuries, witnessing countless secrets and mysteries. But she had a feeling that whatever had happened in Prince George's bedroom was unlike anything these ancient walls had ever seen. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her partner, "Press getting wind of something at the palace."
"How long can we keep this quiet?"
Sarah looked at Crawford, who had seen her check her phone. "How long do we have before this becomes public?" she asked.
"If we're lucky, maybe 24 hours.
The palace press office is preparing a statement about a minor security incident, but if any details leak..."
Crawford didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah understood.
Once the media learned that a member of the royal family had been attacked in their own bedroom, the story would explode across every news outlet in the world. The pressure to solve the case would become enormous, and her ability to conduct a thorough investigation would be severely compromised. As they approached the private quarters where Prince George was staying with his parents, Sarah steeled herself for what promised to be the most challenging interview of her career. She had questioned child witnesses before, but never under circumstances like these. The boy had survived something that defied explanation, and he might be the only person who could help her understand what had really happened in that bedroom. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of them, and, with each step, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Whatever had attacked Prince George was still out there, and if she couldn't find answers soon, it might strike again. #The interview. The private quarters of the Prince and Princess of Wales felt different from the formal areas of the palace. Here, family photographs mixed with official portraits, children's drawings were stuck to expensive wallpaper with tape, and the scent of fresh coffee suggested a morning routine disrupted by crisis. Sarah was led into a sitting room where Prince William stood by the window, his back rigid with tension. Princess Catherine sat on the edge of an armchair, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Between them, on a small sofa that looked like it had been chosen more for comfort than formality, sat Prince George. The 9-year-old looked smaller than Sarah had expected. His dark hair was still messy from sleep, and he wore pajamas decorated with cartoon dinosaurs that seemed almost heartbreakingly normal given the circumstances. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They held a wariness that no child should possess.
"Your Royal Highnesses," Sarah said, offering a respectful nod. "I'm Detective Inspector Mitchell.
I know this is an incredibly difficult time, but I hope you understand that speaking with Prince George is crucial to our investigation."
Prince William turned from the window.
His face showed the strain of a father trying to balance protecting his child with helping catch whoever had threatened him.
"Inspector, we appreciate everything you're doing, but George has been through enough.
He barely slept after what happened, and, when he did, he had nightmares."
"I understand, sir. I have children of my own.
But Prince George may have seen details that could help us prevent this from happening again, to him or to anyone else." It was Princess Catherine who spoke next, her voice quiet but steady.
"What do you need to know?"
Sarah pulled out a small notebook, deliberately choosing it over her digital recorder. Experience had taught her that children often felt more comfortable when the interview felt like a conversation rather than an interrogation. Prince George, she said, settling into a chair across from him, I know what happened last night was very scary.
You were very brave. Can you tell me what you remember? The boy looked at his parents, then, back at Sarah.
When he spoke, his voice was so quiet she had to lean forward to hear him.
I woke up because something was making noise at my window. What kind of noise? Like scratching.
Like when our cat wants to come inside, but bigger.
Sarah made a note. What did you do when you heard the scratching?
I pulled my covers over my head and tried to go back to sleep. But then, the noise got louder, and I heard the window open. Prince William moved closer to the sofa, his protective instincts clearly on high alert, but he remained silent.
Did you look to see what was making the noise? Sarah asked gently.
George nodded, his eyes growing wider.
I peeked out from under my blanket. There was a man climbing through my window. Can you describe this man?
He was really tall and thin, and he was wearing all black clothes. But his face. George paused, struggling with the memory. His face was wrong.
Wrong how?
It was too white, like paper. And his eyes were really dark, like holes. And when he smiled, George shivered despite the warm room. He had teeth like a shark. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Children were known for their vivid imaginations, especially after traumatic events, but George's description was remarkably consistent and specific.
What happened after you saw him?
I tried to call for help, but no sound came out.
I was too scared. He walked over to my bed really slowly, and he was making this sound. What kind of sound? Like laughing, but not happy laughing. Mean laughing.
And he kept saying my name, but his voice sounded like it was coming from far away, even though he was right there. Princess Catherine reached over and took her son's hand.
It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now.
Sarah noticed that George instinctively pulled back slightly from his mother's touch, which was unusual. Most children sought physical comfort when discussing traumatic events.
Prince George, what happened when you reached your bed?
He grabbed me by my shoulders and pulled me up. His hands were really cold, like ice. And he kept smiling with those teeth.
George touched his neck unconsciously. That's when he bit me. Do you remember what the bite felt like?
It hurt at first, but then it felt strange.
Like falling asleep, but not in a good way. Like being pulled underwater.
George's voice grew even quieter. And I could hear him talking, but not with his mouth.
The words were inside my head.
Sarah exchanged glances with Prince William, whose face had grown pale.
What did the voice in your head say? It said that I belonged to him now. That he would come back for me when I was ready.
George looked directly at Sarah for the first time.
What did he mean? Ready for what?
Before Sarah could respond, Princess Catherine stood abruptly.
I think that's enough questions for now, Inspector. But Sarah pressed on gently.
Prince George, this is very important.
How did you get away from him? I don't know.
1 minute he was holding me and biting my neck, and the next minute I was hiding in my wardrobe.
I don't remember how I got there. It was like time jumped. Sarah made careful notes.
Gaps in memory were common in trauma cases, but something about George's description suggested this might be different.
Do you remember anything else about the man? What he was wearing, if he had any distinguishing marks? George thought for a moment. He had a ring on his finger. A big silver ring with a red stone.
And there was something carved into it, like a picture.
What kind of picture?
It looked like a bird with its wings spread out, but not a nice bird.
A scary bird.
Sarah wrote this down, making a mental note to research symbols that matched George's description. Prince George, you said the man left through the window.
Did you see him go? No.
I was hiding in the wardrobe with my eyes closed. But I heard the window close, and then everything got quiet again.
How long did you stay in the wardrobe? Until Mrs. Hartwell found me.
I was too scared to come out before then, but. Sarah closed her notebook and looked at the three family members.
Prince George appeared exhausted by the interview, slumping against the sofa cushions.
His parents looked like they hadn't slept in days.
Thank you, Prince George. You've been very helpful and very brave. As Sarah prepared to leave, Prince William walked her toward the door.
Inspector, he said quietly, what George described, it doesn't sound like a normal break-in, does it?
No, sir, it doesn't.
But I want to assure you that we're taking every precaution to ensure his safety.
There's something else, Prince William said, glancing back to make sure George couldn't hear.
Since this happened, George has been different.
Different how? He won't eat.
Says everything tastes wrong.
He can't stand bright lights, we've had to keep the curtains drawn all day.
And he keeps talking about being cold, even though the room is quite warm. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine.
Has the palace doctor seen him since the initial examination?
Yes, this morning.
Physically, he seems fine.
The bite marks are healing remarkably well, you can barely see them now.
But his behavior.
Prince William trailed off. I'd like to speak with the doctor, Sarah said.
Of course. Inspector, I have to ask, do you have any theories about what happened?
Because what George described, it sounds like something out of a horror film. Sarah chose her words carefully. I've seen cases where traumatic experiences can cause children to remember events in ways that seem fantastical. The mind sometimes processes terror by transforming it into something that feels more manageable, like a story or a nightmare. But, even as she said the words, Sarah wasn't convinced by her own explanation. George's account had been too detailed, too consistent, and too specific for a simple case of imaginative recollection. After leaving the royal family, Sarah met with Dr. Margaret Holloway, the palace physician who had examined Prince George. Dr. Holloway was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of competent manner that inspired confidence in patients and colleagues alike. Inspector, I have to say, this is the most unusual case I've encountered in 30 years of practice, Dr. Holloway said as they sat in her medical office within the palace.
Unusual how? The bite marks, for one thing.
I've seen human bite marks, animal bite marks, but these were different.
The puncture wounds were incredibly precise, almost surgical in their placement.
And the depth was perfect, just deep enough to draw blood, but not deep enough to cause lasting damage.
You mentioned that they're healing quickly?
Extraordinarily quickly. When I first examined Prince George at 6 a.m., the wounds were fresh and clearly visible. By 2 p.m., they had already begun to close. At this rate, they'll be completely healed within 48 hours. Dr. Holloway pulled out a medical file and showed Sarah a series of photographs taken at different times throughout the day. Look at the progression, she said. This level of healing would normally take weeks, not hours. Sarah studied the photographs. The difference was remarkable, the bite marks were visibly smaller and less defined in each subsequent image.
Could this be a reaction to some kind of medication or treatment?
No, Prince George hasn't received any treatment beyond basic wound cleaning. His body is healing these injuries on its own, at a rate I've never seen before.
What about his other symptoms?
His parents mentioned changes in appetite and sensitivity to light. Dr. Holloway's expression grew more concerned.
Those symptoms are puzzling.
His blood work shows some unusual irregularities, nothing dangerous, but not typical either. His white blood cell count is elevated, as if his body is fighting off an infection, but there are no signs of infection. And his iron levels are unusually low, despite no evidence of significant blood loss.
Could these changes be psychological responses to trauma? Some of them, perhaps.
But the physical changes in his blood chemistry suggest something else is happening.
Inspector, I've been wondering if Prince George might have been exposed to some kind of drug or toxin during the attack. Sarah made notes of everything Dr. Holloway told her.
With each new piece of information, the case became more complex and more disturbing.
Doctor, in your professional opinion, what kind of creature could have made those bite marks?
Dr. Holloway was quiet for a long moment.
If I had to guess, I'd say human. The spacing and shape of the teeth marks suggest human dentition. But the precision of the bite, the perfect depth, the fact that it was delivered to such a specific location on the neck. She shook her head. It's as if whoever did this had medical knowledge of exactly how to bite someone to achieve a specific result. What kind of result? I don't know, and that's what worries me. Inspector, I've been thinking about historical accounts of similar cases, and there are some disturbing parallels to symptoms described in old medical texts. What kind of parallels? Dr. Holloway hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of her own thoughts. There are historical accounts of bite victims experiencing rapid healing, aversion to light, changes in appetite, and altered blood chemistry. The symptoms are remarkably similar to what Prince George is displaying. What were these historical cases attributed to? Dr. Holloway met Sarah's eyes directly. Most of them were dismissed as folklore or hysteria. But, Inspector, given what I'm seeing with Prince George, I'm beginning to wonder if there might have been some basis in medical reality for those old accounts. Sarah left her meeting with Dr. Holloway with more questions than answers. As she walked through the palace corridors toward her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was dealing with something far more complex than a simple assault case. Her phone rang as she reached the palace entrance. It was her partner, Detective Sergeant Tom Harrison. Sarah, we've got a problem. The media is starting to ask questions. Someone leaked that there was an incident involving Prince George, and they're pushing for details. How much time do we have? Maybe 12 hours before they put together enough pieces to run with the story. And there's something else, we've been getting calls from people claiming to have seen someone matching the description George gave. A tall figure in dark clothes, spotted in various locations around London over the past week. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. How many calls? 7 so far, all from different areas of the city. And, Sarah? 2 of the callers mentioned that whoever they saw was moving in ways that seemed unnatural, the same word the palace guards used. As Sarah drove away from Kensington Palace, she couldn't escape the feeling that whatever had attacked Prince George was still out there, and that the boy might still be in danger. The rapid healing of his wounds, the changes in his blood chemistry, and his behavioral symptoms all suggested that the attack had been more than just a random act of violence. It had been something planned, something purposeful, and something that was far from over. The investigation deepens. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell sat in her office at New Scotland Yard, surrounded by files, photographs, and evidence bags that seemed to mock her with their inability to provide clear answers. It had been 3 days since the attack on Prince George, and, rather than becoming clearer, the case was growing more mysterious by the hour. The media pressure had reached fever pitch. Headlines screamed about a palace security breach and royal child in danger, though thankfully the specific details of Prince George's attack remained classified. Sarah knew that wouldn't last long. In her experience, secrets involving the royal family had a way of finding their way to the press, no matter how carefully they were guarded. Her desk phone rang, interrupting her review of witness statements. Inspector Mitchell? This is Commander Harrison. We need you back at the palace immediately. There's been another incident. Sarah's blood ran cold. Prince George? No, thank God. But someone matching the description from the first attack was seen on palace grounds last night. This time, we have evidence. 20 minutes later, Sarah was walking through Kensington Palace Gardens with Officer Crawford and a new face, Detective Chief Inspector Robert Thorne, a man whose reputation for handling sensitive cases preceded him. Thorne was tall and thin, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. Sarah had worked with him twice before and knew that his involvement meant the case had been escalated to the highest levels. Inspector Mitchell, Thorne said by way of greeting. I've been brought in to oversee this investigation. The Home Secretary is breathing down everyone's necks, and we need results. Sarah nodded, though privately she bristled at the implied criticism. She had been making progress, even if that progress raised more questions than it answered. What happened last night? She asked Crawford. Motion detectors picked up movement in the East Garden at 2:23 a.m. The guards responded immediately this time. We weren't taking any chances after what happened to Prince George.
They walked toward a section of the garden where the perfectly manicured lawn had been disturbed. Sarah could see clear impressions in the soft earth, footprints that were larger than normal and seemed to have been made by someone moving at considerable speed.
The guards saw whoever it was? Sarah asked.
Officer Jameson got the closest look, Crawford replied.
He's waiting to speak with you.
They found Officer Jameson near the garden wall, still visibly shaken despite his attempt to maintain professional composure. He was a veteran guard with 15 years of experience, not the type to be easily rattled. "Tell Inspector Mitchell what you saw," Thorne commanded.
Jameson cleared his throat.
"I was responding to the motion detector alert when I saw a figure running across the lawn.
Tall, dressed in dark clothing, just like Prince George described. But, sir..."
He paused, struggling with his words.
The way it moved wasn't natural. It was too fast, too fluid. Like it was floating rather than running.
"How close did you get?"
Sarah asked. About 30 meters.
I called out for the person to stop, and it turned to look at me.
Jameson's face grew pale at the memory. Its face was completely white, almost glowing in the moonlight. And its eyes. I've never seen anything like them.
They were completely black, like looking into deep water at night.
Sarah exchanged glances with Thorne. Jameson's description matched Prince George's account almost perfectly. What happened next?
I drew my weapon and ordered it to get on the ground. But, instead of complying or running away, it smiled at me. That's when I saw its teeth, long and pointed, like an animal's fangs.
Then, it made this sound. What kind of sound? Like laughing, but not human laughing.
More like wind blowing through a graveyard.
Jameson shook his head.
I know how that sounds, sir, but I swear that's what I heard.
Did you pursue?
I tried to, but it disappeared.
Disappeared how?
Jameson looked uncomfortable. 1 second it was standing there, smiling at me with those terrible teeth.
The next second, it was gone. Not running away, gone.
Like it had vanished into thin air.
Thorne stepped forward. Officer Jameson, are you certain about what you saw? This is a very serious matter, and accuracy is crucial. Sir, I know how it sounds. I know it doesn't make sense.
But, I swear on my mother's grave, that's exactly what happened.
Sarah crouched down to examine the footprints more closely.
They were indeed larger than normal human prints, and there was something odd about their depth and spacing. Most people left deeper impressions with their heels when running, but these prints were uniformly deep, as if made by someone who landed on the balls of their feet with each step.
Have we had these prints analyzed? She asked. The forensics team is on the way, Crawford replied. But, Inspector, there's something else you need to see.
He led them to a section of the garden wall where the ivy had been disturbed. Scratched into the ancient stone were symbols, not random markings, but deliberate carved images that seemed to form some kind of pattern.
When were these made? Sarah asked.
Sometime between midnight and 2:23 a.m., when the motion detectors were triggered.
The groundskeeper swears they weren't there yesterday.
Sarah studied the symbols carefully. They appeared to be a mixture of letters and pictographs, carved with something incredibly sharp. In the center of the pattern was an image that made her pulse quicken, a bird with outstretched wings, identical to what Prince George had described seeing on his attacker's ring. "I'll need photographs of all of these," she said. "And I want them sent to every symbology expert we can find."
As the forensics team arrived and began their work, Sarah walked with Thorne toward the palace. What's your assessment, Inspector? Thorne asked.
Sarah chose her words carefully. "Sir, I believe we're dealing with someone who has intimate knowledge of palace security, considerable physical capabilities, and some kind of psychological condition that makes them believe they possess supernatural abilities."
You think the witness accounts are exaggerated?
I think people see what they expect to see, especially in stressful situations.
Officer Jameson expected to see a normal intruder.
When he encountered someone whose appearance and behavior were outside his experience, his mind filled in details to make sense of what he was seeing. But, even as Sarah spoke the words, she wasn't entirely convinced by her own explanation. The consistency of the witness accounts, the physical evidence, and the increasingly strange aspects of the case all suggested something more complex than a person with delusions.
"There's another matter we need to discuss," Thorne said as they entered the palace. "Prince George's condition. What about it?"
According to Dr. Holloway, his symptoms are worsening. The bite marks have healed completely, but his behavioral changes are becoming more pronounced. They were led to Dr. Holloway's office, where the physician was waiting with a thick file of test results and observations.
"Inspectors," Dr. Holloway said, "I'm afraid Prince George's condition is becoming increasingly concerning.
His sensitivity to light has become so severe that he can only tolerate artificial lighting at the lowest possible settings. His appetite has disappeared almost entirely, he's barely eating anything."
"What about his sleep patterns?" Sarah asked. "That's perhaps the most troubling development. He's sleeping during the day and becoming active at night.
When he does sleep, he experiences vivid nightmares that seem incredibly real to him."
"What kind of nightmares?"
He says he dreams that he's flying over London at night, looking down at the city from great heights.
In the dreams, he feels an overwhelming hunger that can only be satisfied by. Dr. Holloway paused. "By what, doctor?" "By drinking blood."
"Inspector, I know how that sounds, but Prince George describes these dreams with a level of detail that's disturbing. He talks about being able to smell people from great distances, about being able to hear their heartbeats through walls." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine.
"Could these symptoms be caused by some kind of drug or toxin? I've run every test I can think of."
His blood chemistry shows continued abnormalities, but nothing that matches any known substance.
However, there is one test result that's particularly puzzling.
Dr. Holloway handed Sarah a laboratory report. Prince George's DNA shows minor but consistent alterations. Nothing dramatic, but changes to genetic markers that should be absolutely stable.
"It's as if something is rewriting his genetic code at a cellular level."
Thorne leaned forward.
"Is that even possible?" "Not with any current medical technology. And certainly not as a result of trauma or psychological stress."
Sarah studied the laboratory report, though most of the technical language was beyond her understanding.
"Doctor, are these changes dangerous to Prince George?" "I don't know. There's no precedent for anything like this.
I've consulted with colleagues around the world, and no one has seen genetic alterations like these outside of controlled laboratory experiments."
"What kind of laboratory experiments?" "Theoretical research into genetic modification, gene therapy, advanced virology."
"But, even in those contexts, the changes I'm seeing in Prince George's blood work would be considered impossible with current technology."
After leaving Dr. Holloway's office, Sarah and Thorne walked through the palace corridors in thoughtful silence.
The case was becoming more complex by the hour, and Sarah was beginning to feel like she was missing something fundamental.
"Inspector," Thorne said finally, "I need you to consider the possibility that we're dealing with something outside normal parameters." "What do you mean, sir?"
"I mean that everything we've learned suggests this case might require resources and expertise beyond standard police work."
Sarah stopped walking. "Are you suggesting we bring in specialists?" "I'm suggesting we consider all possibilities."
The Home Secretary has made it clear that solving this case is a top priority, regardless of how unconventional the solution might be.
"What kind of specialists are we talking about?" "People who study unusual phenomena. Researchers who investigate cases that don't fit standard categories." Sarah felt a mix of relief and apprehension.
On one hand, she was glad to acknowledge that the case was beyond her normal experience. On the other hand, she worried about what it meant when a police investigation required the input of people who studied unusual phenomena. Her phone rang as they reached the palace entrance.
"Inspector Mitchell? This is Dr. Jonathan Blackwood from Cambridge University.
I understand you're investigating some unusual symbols found at Kensington Palace."
"Yes, Doctor." "How did you?"
"Commander Harrison contacted me." I specialize in historical symbology and occult imagery.
Inspector, the photographs you sent are quite remarkable. I believe I can provide some context for what you're dealing with. What kind of context?
The symbols you found match historical accounts of rituals designed to create a connection between an attacker and their victim. Specifically, rituals intended to begin a process of transformation.
Sarah felt her mouth go dry. Transformation into what?
Inspector, I think it would be better if we discuss this in person. There are aspects of what you've discovered that are quite serious, and I don't think they should be discussed over the phone.
How soon can you be in London?
I'm already here.
I can meet you wherever is convenient.
Sarah looked at Thorne, who nodded.
Can you come to New Scotland Yard?
We'll need somewhere secure to discuss this.
Of course. Inspector, there's one more thing you should know. The symbols you found aren't just decorative. If my interpretation is correct, they're instructions.
Instructions for what?
For completing whatever process was begun when Prince George was attacked. The phone line went silent except for the sound of Sarah's increasingly rapid heartbeat.
She looked at Thorne, whose expression had grown grave.
Dr. Blackwood, exactly what are we dealing with?
Inspector, I believe Prince George was the victim of an attack that was designed to change him into something else.
And, if the symbols are accurate, that process is still ongoing.
The expert's revelation. Dr. Jonathan Blackwood arrived at New Scotland Yard carrying a leather satchel that looked like it had seen decades of use. He was a man in his early 60s, with wild gray hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths of knowledge that made Sarah slightly uncomfortable. His hands were stained with ink, and his clothes suggested someone who spent more time in libraries than in the outside world. Sarah and Chief Inspector Thorne met him in Conference Room B, a secure space typically reserved for discussions of national security matters. The room's sterile white walls and fluorescent lighting seemed at odds with the ancient mysteries they were about to discuss.
Thank you for coming so quickly, Dr. Blackwood, Thorne said as they settled around the conference table.
Blackwood opened his satchel and withdrew a collection of old books, photocopied documents, and what appeared to be hand-drawn sketches. The musty smell of old paper filled the room. Inspectors, I must begin by saying that what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible. I ask only that you listen with an open mind, because the safety of Prince George may depend on your understanding the true nature of what you're dealing with.
Sarah pulled out her notebook. We're listening, Doctor.
Blackwood spread several photographs across the table, the images of symbols carved into the palace wall that Sarah had sent him. Next to them, he placed pages from ancient texts showing remarkably similar markings. These symbols, he said, pointing to the palace photographs, are not random vandalism. They form what historical texts call a binding circle, a ritual marking designed to create a supernatural connection between an attacker and a victim.
Supernatural how? Thorne asked, his skepticism clear in his voice.
Inspector, I know how this sounds. I've spent 40 years studying historical accounts of phenomena that mainstream science dismisses as folklore.
But, what happened to Prince George matches documented cases going back centuries. Blackwood opened one of his books to a page filled with medieval illustrations.
These are accounts from the 14th century, describing attacks remarkably similar to what Prince George experienced. Victims bitten on the neck by attackers described as unnaturally pale, with black eyes and elongated teeth. The victims then experienced rapid healing of their wounds, sensitivity to light, changes in appetite, and altered sleep patterns.
Sarah looked at the medieval drawings.
Despite their crude artistic style, they bore an unsettling resemblance to Prince George's description of his attacker.
What were these historical cases attributed to? She asked. Vampirism, Blackwood said simply.
The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah felt ridiculous even considering it, but the evidence was becoming increasingly difficult to explain through conventional means.
Dr. Blackwood, Thorne said carefully, are you suggesting that Prince George was attacked by a vampire?
I'm suggesting that Prince George was attacked by someone or something that exhibits characteristics historically associated with vampirism. Whether that entity is supernatural in nature or represents some kind of unknown medical condition is beyond my expertise to determine.
Blackwood pulled out another document, this one more recent. What I can tell you is that there have been similar cases in modern times.
Not many, and most are dismissed by authorities or covered up, but they exist. In each case, the pattern is the same: a bite victim experiences rapid healing, behavioral changes, and gradual transformation.
Transformation into what? Sarah asked.
Into something that requires blood to survive and possesses abilities beyond normal human capacity.
Inspector, if the historical accounts are accurate, Prince George is in the early stages of becoming like his attacker.
Sarah felt the room spinning slightly.
How long does this transformation supposedly take?
According to the texts, approximately 7 to 10 days from the initial bite.
Today is day 4.
Thorne stood up abruptly and walked to the window.
Dr. Blackwood, you're asking us to believe in monsters. Inspector, I'm asking you to consider the evidence.
Prince George was bitten by someone who left no fingerprints, DNA evidence, or any trace beyond mysterious symbols. His wounds healed impossibly fast. His genetic structure is being altered at a cellular level. Multiple witnesses have described seeing an attacker whose appearance and abilities seem beyond normal human capability. Blackwood opened his satchel and withdrew a small, ornate mirror. There's a simple test we can perform to determine if my theory is correct, he said.
What kind of test? Sarah asked.
According to legend, beings in the process of vampiric transformation gradually lose their reflection.
If Prince George is being changed, his reflection should already be growing fainter.
Sarah looked at Thorne, who had returned to the table.
You're suggesting we hold up a mirror to a 9-year-old boy to see if he's becoming a vampire? Thorne asked.
Inspector, if I'm wrong, the mirror will show his normal reflection, and you can dismiss everything I've told you as the ravings of an eccentric academic.
But, if I'm right. If you're right, what then? Sarah asked. How do we stop it? Blackwood's expression grew grave.
According to the historical accounts, there are ways to halt the transformation, but they become less effective as time passes.
After day 7, the change may become irreversible. What kind of ways?
Ritual purification, exposure to certain substances that are toxic to vampiric entities, and, most importantly, destroying the connection between the victim and their attacker.
How do we destroy that connection?
We have to find whoever attacked Prince George and prevent them from completing the ritual they began.
Sarah felt overwhelmed by the implications of what Blackwood was suggesting. Doctor, assuming for a moment that your theory is correct, how do we find someone who can apparently vanish at will and move in ways that defy normal human capability? The symbols carved into the palace wall provide a clue. The binding ritual requires the attacker to return to the site of the original attack to complete the transformation. Based on the historical patterns, this return visit typically occurs on the 7th night. That's 3 days from now, Thorne calculated.
Yes. And, when the attacker returns, they will be more powerful than during the original encounter.
The connection with Prince George will have made them stronger. Sarah's phone rang, interrupting the discussion.
It was Officer Crawford from the palace.
Inspector, we need you here immediately.
Prince George has disappeared.
Sarah's blood ran cold. What do you mean, disappeared?
He was in his room with his parents 30 minutes ago. When his mother went to check on him, the room was empty. The window was open, and there are no signs of a struggle.
We'll be right there, Sarah said, hanging up. She looked at Blackwood and Thorne. If your theory is correct, Doctor, what does it mean that Prince George is missing? Blackwood's face had gone pale. It means the transformation is accelerating.
As victims change, they become compelled to seek out their attacker. Prince George may be going to wherever his attacker is hiding.
But, he's 9 years old, Thorne protested. How could he get out of the palace undetected? Inspector, if Prince George is developing vampiric abilities, age becomes less relevant.
These entities possess strength and agility far beyond normal humans, even in the early stages of transformation. The 3 of them raced through London toward Kensington Palace, Sarah's mind spinning with implications. If Blackwood was right, they weren't just looking for a missing child, they were looking for a child who was becoming something else entirely. When they arrived at the palace, the scene was controlled chaos. Palace security had mobilized every available officer, and the grounds were being searched systematically. Prince William and Princess Catherine looked devastated, their faces showing the strain of parents whose child had vanished without a trace.
Officer Crawford met them at the entrance. "The room shows no signs of forced entry," he reported.
"The window was open from the inside, and there are scratches on the windowsill that suggest someone climbed out."
"What about security cameras?" Sarah asked.
"That's the strangest part. The cameras show Prince George in his room at 8:47 p.m., and then, he simply vanishes from the footage. Not like he walked out of frame, like he disappeared entirely." Dr. Blackwood examined the photographs of Prince George's room with intense interest. "The scratches on the windowsill," he said.
"May I see them?"
They went to the boy's bedroom, where forensics teams were still collecting evidence.
Blackwood studied the deep gouges in the wood with a magnifying glass. "These weren't made by climbing equipment," he said. "They were made by fingernails."
"But, look at the depth and spacing, no normal human fingernails could create marks like these."
Sarah felt sick. "Are you saying Prince George made these marks?"
"I'm saying that whoever made these marks possessed fingernails significantly longer and stronger than normal. Inspector, we need to consider the possibility that Prince George left the palace voluntarily."
"Where would he go?"
"To find his attacker."
The compulsion becomes stronger as the transformation progresses.
"He may not even be consciously aware of why he's seeking out that person."
Thorne pulled Sarah aside.
"Inspector, I know this sounds insane, but we have to consider the possibility that Dr. Blackwood is right. A missing royal child is a crisis under any circumstances, but if that child is developing supernatural abilities..."
"What are you suggesting, sir?"
"I'm suggesting we proceed on the assumption that Dr. Blackwood's theory is correct, at least until we have evidence to the contrary."
"The stakes are too high to dismiss any possibility." Sarah nodded reluctantly.
"Dr. Blackwood, if Prince George is seeking out his attacker, where would he go?" "Based on the historical accounts, vampiric entities typically establish lairs in places that provide protection from sunlight and easy access to victims. In medieval times, this meant crypts and caves.
In modern London,
abandoned buildings, underground tunnels, anywhere dark and secluded," Sarah finished.
"Exactly. But there's another factor to consider.
The binding ritual requires specific conditions to be completed.
The location must have historical significance or supernatural resonance. What kind of places have supernatural resonance in London?"
Blackwood smiled grimly. "Inspector, London is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. There are dozens of locations with centuries of supernatural association, old churches, plague pits, ancient burial grounds, sites of historical tragedies." Sarah realized they could be looking at hundreds of potential locations across the city. With Prince George missing and the transformation supposedly accelerating, they were running out of time.
Dr. Blackwood, is there any way to track where Prince George might have gone?
There might be. The connection between attacker and victim works both ways.
If we can determine the location of one, we might be able to find the other. How?
The symbols carved into the palace wall aren't just binding marks, they're also a kind of map. If I can decipher them completely, they might tell us where the ritual is meant to be completed." Blackwood pulled out his photographs of the symbols and began studying them with intense concentration. As he worked, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against a deadline that would determine not just Prince George's fate, but potentially the safety of everyone in London.
"Doctor," she said quietly, "what happens if we don't find Prince George in time?"
Blackwood looked up from his work, his eyes filled with an ancient sadness. "Inspector, if the transformation completes, Prince George will become like his attacker, a creature that requires blood to survive and possesses abilities that make him virtually unstoppable. But, more importantly, as a member of the royal family, he would have access to places and people that would make him incredibly dangerous."
"And there would be two of them," Thorne added grimly.
"Yes," Blackwood agreed. And, if the historical accounts are accurate, newly transformed vampires are often more vicious than their creators, because they haven't yet learned to control their hunger. The implications hung in the air like a dark cloud.
Sarah looked at her watch, 11:23 p.m.
Somewhere in London, a 9-year-old prince was wandering through the night, drawn by compulsions he didn't understand toward a creature that wanted to complete his transformation into a monster. And they had less than 3 days to find him before it was too late. #The final confrontation. Dr. Blackwood worked through the night, his ancient texts spread across the conference table like battle plans. Sarah had sent teams to search every abandoned building and underground tunnel in central London, but so far they had found no trace of Prince George or his mysterious attacker. As dawn approached, Blackwood suddenly looked up from his translations, his eyes wide with realization.
"I've found it," he announced. "The symbols aren't just binding marks, they're coordinates."
Sarah and Thorne, both exhausted from the all-night search, immediately focused their attention on the academic.
"Coordinates to where?" Sarah asked.
"St. Bartholomew's Crypt," Blackwood replied, pointing to a specific combination of symbols.
"It's one of London's oldest burial sites, dating back to the 12th century. The church was destroyed during the Blitz, but the underground crypt system survived." "Why would Prince George's attacker choose that location?" Thorne inquired. "Because it's where the ritual must be completed.
St. Bartholomew's Crypt has a history of supernatural activity going back centuries. More importantly, it contains a specific chamber known as the Blood Chapel, where medieval accounts describe similar transformation rituals taking place." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine.
"How do we get there?"
"The entrance is hidden beneath the ruins of the original church in Smithfield."
"But, Inspector, we need to understand what we're walking into."
"If my translations are correct, the final stage of the transformation ritual requires the victim to willingly accept their change. Prince George will be there, but he may no longer be entirely himself."
"What do you mean?" Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer.
"The compulsion that drew him to his attacker will have grown stronger. By now, Prince George may genuinely believe that becoming like his attacker is what he wants.
The person we find may not welcome rescue."
At 6:47 a.m., exactly 7 days after the original attack, Sarah led a tactical team toward the ruins of St. Bartholomew's Church. The early morning mist hung low over the ancient stones, creating an atmosphere that seemed pulled from a Gothic novel. Dr. Blackwood guided them to a section of the ruins where several large stone slabs lay partially covered by centuries of debris. Working together, the team managed to move one of the slabs, revealing a narrow stone stairway leading down into darkness. "Remember," Blackwood whispered as they prepared to descend, "whatever we find down there, Prince George is still a child. The transformation may be affecting his mind, but he's not beyond saving yet." Sarah led the way with a powerful flashlight, followed by Dr. Blackwood and 4 armed officers. The stairs were ancient and worn, carved from stone that had been worked by craftsmen dead for 800 years. The air grew colder as they descended, and Sarah could smell something that reminded her unpleasantly of old blood. The stairway opened into a large underground chamber with vaulted ceilings and walls lined with stone niches that had once held the bones of the dead. But it was what occupied the center of the chamber that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Prince George stood in the middle of a circular pattern carved into the stone floor. The symbols were identical to those found at the palace, but these were older, worn smooth by centuries. The boy's appearance had changed dramatically. His skin was paper white, his eyes had darkened until they seemed like black pools, and, when he smiled at their arrival, Sarah could see that his teeth had grown longer and sharper. But it was the figure standing behind Prince George that truly terrified her. The creature that had attacked the prince was tall and impossibly thin, dressed in dark clothes that seemed to absorb light. Its face was alabaster white, its eyes were completely black, and its smile revealed fangs that gleamed in the flashlight beam. Most disturbing of all, it looked pleased to see them. "Inspector Mitchell," the creature said in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once.
"How good of you to join us for the final ceremony."
Sarah drew her weapon, though she wondered if bullets would have any effect on something that could apparently vanish at will.
"Prince George," she called out, "we're here to take you home. Your parents are worried about you."
The boy turned to look at her, and Sarah's heart broke at what she saw. His eyes held recognition, but also something else, a hunger that no 9-year-old should possess. "I don't want to go home," Prince George said, and his voice had changed too. It carried an adult certainty that chilled Sarah more than his physical transformation.
"This is where I belong now. With him." The creature placed a pale hand on Prince George's shoulder. "The child has chosen freely," it said. "The old blood calls to the new blood. Soon he will be complete, and, together we will feed on this city until it runs dry." Dr. Blackwood stepped forward, clutching a small silver cross. "The transformation isn't complete yet," he said firmly. "Prince George, you're still human. You can still choose to come back with us." The creature laughed, and the sound made the ancient stones seem to vibrate. "Old man, your faith is touching but useless. The boy has already tasted what he will become. Watch." The creature produced a small silver knife and drew it across its own wrist, producing a line of blood so dark it appeared black in the flashlight beam. It held the wound toward Prince George. "Drink," it commanded. Sarah watched in horror as Prince George moved toward the creature's bleeding wrist. If he drank that blood, according to Dr. Blackwood's research, the transformation would be complete and irreversible. "George, don't," she shouted, but the boy seemed transfixed by the offered wound. At the last moment, something seemed to break through the compulsion. Prince George stopped, his hand halfway to the creature's wrist, and looked back at Sarah with eyes that suddenly seemed like a child's again. "Inspector Mitchell," he said in a small, frightened voice. "I want to go home. I want my mummy and daddy." The creature's expression changed from triumph to fury. "No," it hissed. "You belong to me now. You cannot resist the blood calling." But Prince George had stepped back from the offered wrist, and Sarah could see him fighting against whatever influence the creature had over him. "I don't want this," the boy said, his voice growing stronger. "I want to be normal. I want to be human." Dr. Blackwood began reciting something in Latin, his voice echoing through the ancient chamber. The creature turned its attention to him, baring fangs that seemed to grow longer as Sarah watched. "Your prayers cannot save him, old man. The ritual has begun. It must be completed." "Not if we destroy the binding circle," Blackwood replied, pointing to the carved symbols on the floor. The creature moved faster than Sarah's eyes could follow, crossing the chamber in an instant and seizing Dr. Blackwood by the throat. But, as it did so, Prince George suddenly cried out in pain and collapsed to his knees. "The connection works both ways," Blackwood gasped. "Harm me, and you harm the boy." The creature released him immediately, clearly frustrated by this limitation. Sarah realized this might be their only chance. While the creature was distracted, she aimed her weapon not at the monster, but at the carved symbols on the floor. "If I destroy the ritual circle, what happens?" she called out to Blackwood. "The connection breaks," he replied. "But you have to destroy the central symbol, the one Prince George is standing on." Sarah looked at the boy, who was still kneeling in the middle of the carved pattern. If she fired at the floor near him, she risked hitting him with ricocheting stone fragments. "George," she called out, "you need to move away from the center of the circle." "Can you do that?" The boy looked up at her, his face showing the strain of fighting against supernatural compulsion. "I can't," he said. "Something is holding me here." The creature smiled triumphantly. "The ritual binds him to that spot until it is completed. You cannot destroy the circle without destroying the child." But Dr. Blackwood had been studying the carved symbols more carefully. "Inspector, there's another way. The binding circle has a weakness. If Prince George willingly rejects the transformation, it breaks the connection immediately." "I already said I don't want it," Prince George protested. "No, child," Blackwood explained. "You must actively reject it. You must choose your humanity over the power being offered. That means accepting that you'll be weaker, more vulnerable, and ordinary." The creature hissed in fury. "Boy, think of what you're giving up. Strength beyond measure, speed that makes you untouchable, senses that can perceive things no human can experience. You could live forever. But I wouldn't be me anymore, would I? Prince George asked. The creature's silence was answer enough.
Prince George looked around the ancient chamber, at the creature that had attacked him, at the police officers who had come to rescue him, and, finally, at Sarah.
"I want to be Prince George," he said firmly. "Not a monster. Not someone who hurts people. I want to go home."
The effect was immediate and dramatic. The carved symbols on the floor began to glow with a pale light, then, suddenly, cracked and crumbled. The creature let out a shriek of rage that seemed to shake the entire underground chamber.
"You have made an enemy for life, boy," it snarled. "I will find you again." But, even as it spoke, the creature was becoming less solid, fading like smoke in the wind. "The connection is broken," Blackwood announced with relief. "It can no longer maintain its physical form without the ritual anchor."
Within moments, the creature had vanished entirely, leaving only the echo of its final threat hanging in the air. Prince George collapsed completely, but, when Sarah reached him, he was breathing normally and his eyes had returned to their natural color. The unnatural pallor was fading from his skin, and his teeth appeared to be returning to normal size.
"Is it over?" the boy asked weakly.
"It's over," Sarah assured him, helping him to his feet.
"You're going to be fine. You're human, you're safe, and we're taking you home."
As they made their way back up the ancient stone stairs, Prince George walking between Sarah and Dr. Blackwood, the boy looked back once at the underground chamber.
"Inspector Mitchell," he said quietly, "will it really come back for me someday?"
Sarah considered lying to comfort him, but decided he deserved honesty after everything he had been through.
"I don't know, George. But, if it does, we'll be ready for it.
And now you know how strong you really are, strong enough to choose who you want to be, even when something very powerful was trying to make that choice for you."
Prince George nodded solemnly, then managed a small smile. "I want to see my parents," he said. "They're waiting for you," Sarah replied.
As they emerged from the ruins into the morning sunlight, Sarah's radio crackled with reports from the search teams around London. Several people reported seeing a tall figure in dark clothing simply vanish into thin air as the sun rose, confirming that the creature's power had been broken. But Sarah knew that this case would haunt her for the rest of her career. She had witnessed things that challenged everything she thought she knew about the world, and she had helped save a child from a fate that, until a week ago, she would have dismissed as impossible. Prince George's ordeal was over, but Sarah realized that her understanding of reality had been permanently changed. London was an ancient city with deep mysteries, and some of those mysteries were darker than she had ever imagined. As they drove back toward Kensington Palace, Prince George fell asleep in the back seat, finally, looking like the ordinary 9-year-old boy he had chosen to remain. But Sarah couldn't forget the creature's final words, and she made a mental note to ensure that the royal security protocols included preparations for threats that went beyond the merely human.
Some monsters, she now knew, were very real indeed.